You work with children with autism, or if you have a child with autism, today's study is definitely for you. We are diving into echolalia, and we're going to look at the very latest research in the field of speech-language pathology as to whether or not it's a good idea to reduce echolalia or whether we want to encourage echolalia. Echolalia is essentially simply repeating utterances. It can be immediate or it can be delayed. We're going to look at 74 intervention studies in this review that worked to reduce echolalia. They're largely ABA intervention studies. 54 out of the 74 are that we're going to look at today. We want to consider if that had a negative impact on spontaneous speech development. Is it a good idea to reduce echolalia, or is echolalia actually a good thing that promotes communication development? This is a very important issue to consider as a speech-language pathologist. When we look at this study, we have 74 studies. Now, I didn't know there's 74 studies out there on reducing echolalia for children between the ages of 0 to 21. A lot of them are between the ages of 3 to 10 years that are included in the study. However, if you take a closer look at the study, this is a total of 220 children. So this is case study research. That's on average 3 children a study. There's been in each of these studies, I can say probably with confidence, a majority of children in that study, then you have fingers on one hand. This is not research that you're saying, oh my goodness, this is generalizable. This is statistically significant research. This is what I should be doing on my back porch. This is what works. It has a good effect size. No, this is a couple of kids here and a couple of kids there and a couple of kids there. And a lot of this research, especially in the field of ABA, is biased because it's a person that does ABA that makes a living on ABA, and they're showing that their ABA approach is working. It's not a researcher that's unbiased that's doing the research. It's someone that is vested. When we look at this, an overwhelming number of these, 54 out of the 74 studies, are ABA approaches. So let's look at the numbers, okay? Because the numbers are really going to tell you a lot. They found out of the 74 studies that 69 of them did decrease echolalia. We're talking about decreasing echolalia. What a lot of the studies did is they worked to extinguish the echolalia. What they would do is if the child, for instance, made sounds, they would take a toy away from the child. And then they'd say, I want you to be quiet. And then they would give the child 5 motor directions. Touch your nose, clap your hands, touch your head. Great, following directions. I'm going to give you the toy. Great, being quiet. I like that you're being silent. I think telling speech-language pathologists they don't like this one bit, that the child is being rewarded for being quiet. The back of your neck is probably rising right now. That is an example of differential reinforcement where they're applying reward for quiet behavior and there's the removal of a toy for the echolalia. This was effective. It decreased echolalia. But was that a good thing? Do we want to decrease echolalia? And the reason we need to ask that is because many of our children with autism learn to talk through echolalia. And they're not alone. We learn to talk through echolalia. If you've ever been in another country, for instance, if I'm in Spain and I'm asking someone what's their name, I'll say, ¿Cómo te llamas? Now, when I said ¿Cómo te llamas when I went to Spain, I had no idea ¿Cómo meant how, te you llamas, the verb to call yourself. How do you call yourself? I had no idea what I was saying. And you say ¿Cómo te llamas? If you want to find out someone's name, right? It's echolalia. And then what happens is the person responds and then follows up with a question. And because of that back and forth ball play interaction, your girl learns Spanish, right? And all I'm doing is using echolalia in the beginning. But because of the experiences in which my echolalia is responded to authentically, and even though it's not perfect and I'm speaking horrible Spanish, it is responded to, then I am learning Spanish, and therefore I'm able to go back and forth, and I learn a lot of words, and then over time, my Spanish becomes more spontaneous, it becomes more generative. You've been here before if you've learned another language. You go to another country, you say all these phrases that you've learned, "Cuánto cuesta?" You really don't know what you're saying, but you know that's how you ask how much it is. This is how you ask where the bathroom is. You have no idea what you're saying, you have no idea what each of the words means. They're repeated phrases, and it works. You do it, it's responded to, and suddenly you start learning the language. That is how many children with autism learn to talk. They learn these repeated chunks of language, and then they start using them in context. So for instance, if they want to leave, they might say, okay, see you later, have a nice day, or have a good day. So they're saying these are phrases that I've heard when people are leaving and going out the door. They'll say that phrase, and it's like, this is what you say when you want to leave. And then you model them, all right, bye-bye, and then bye-bye. Then they learn the words. It's then that back and forth ball play. What we want to do is take advantage and capitalize on how they learn language, which is by memorizing chunks of language. And then they use it in context. And when we respond to it with that back and forth ball play interaction, then that's when the words become more spontaneously and generatively used. It's a good thing. Now, getting back to the research. Now, what the research found is that in these studies, in these 54 studies that were ABA studies of reducing the echolalia, only 5 of those studies over time showed an increase in speech. Now, that should be pretty alarming because I researched children's spontaneous language samples over time. And spontaneous speech production increases over time with maturation. With the children with autism, as they improve, the way I know they're improving is not necessarily from their mean length of utterance, but it's more from the spontaneity of their language sample. So what ends up happening is you see an increase in the total number of different words. You see an increase in the number of different utterances. So they stop repeating the same utterances over and over again. It's like when you go into a country, you stop relying on como te llamas, and that's the only thing I know how to say. I know how to say like 10 different things in Spanish. I've been here a few days, right? That's what happens with our children with autism, is as they get better with their echoic language, with their echolalia, and repeating these utterances, they learn more and more utterances through using them. So what happens over time is you see an increase in the percentage of utterances that are novel, that hadn't been said earlier in the language sample. And you see an increase in the total number of different words. Not only have we found this in our research, they've also found this in published research and large studies, that is the largest indicator of growth. When you're looking at children learning to talk that have autism, you see a greater diversity. They only saw an increase in diversity and spontaneous speech. They only saw that in 5 out of the 54 ABA studies that they did here. So that is alarming. That's not good. That's like over time, just over maturation, you expect to see an increase in spontaneous speech. And for only 5 of the 54 that use this approach, I think that they were thinking, well, if we decrease the echolalia, we decrease that memorized speech, we're going to increase the spontaneous speech. But they kind of have it all messed up, because to get to the spontaneous speech, you need to do the memorized speech first. You can't take the bridge away to spontaneous speech. The bridge is the repetitive speech to get to the spontaneous speech. You don't blow up the bridge. And that's what you're doing when you're taking an approach where the child's using repetitive speech, and then you take their toys away when they're doing that, and then you give them the toys back when they're being quiet. You're blowing up the bridge to the spontaneous speech. I look at it very much from a linguistic perspective, And the linguistic and the logical perspective is that you're taking away the natural way in which they develop language. And they develop language through memorizing chunks of language first. And then over time, through use of those chunks of language in context, through it being responded to in back and forth interactions, is how it's going to become more spontaneous and how it's going to become more generative in nature. You're taking that whole experience away if you're going to extinguish that. Now, that is the study. Sometimes we have children who are auditory seekers, and they will make sounds with their mouth repetitively. This is children with autism. This is children with ADT. This is children with sensory dysregulation. This is children with sensory integration disorders. I've seen this with many children, and sensory issues are so prevalent, I think, that I see it in a majority of the population today, sensory issues. But I'm going to give you an example where there's a time where you really do want to give these children strategies. I've had children, for instance, who will make vehicle sounds, and they're really realistic. They sound epic, right? So, woo, 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 woo. Now, these are children who can talk. These are children you can have conversations with, but they're making the vehicle sound, and it's at an expense because when they're making the vehicle sound, they can't hear you. They can't interact with the other children. They can't have conversations. It is all encompassing. It even takes up their ability to interact with the toys around them because they're getting so into the sounds that they're making with their mouth that it's at the exclusion of all other experiences. With children like this, that are making vehicle sounds, and it might be time where we're in group time, right? And we're learning a concept, and they're making the vehicle sound really, really, really loudly, and they can't hear you. They can't hear the children around them. The children around can't hear. And that's the time where you say, we make vehicle sounds when we're playing with, and they're going to say cars or vehicles. And then say, now we're reading I'll say book. And they'll say book. And then they're talking. I do a completion prompt. And we're reading the book. We get back to the book. But during that time, I do think it's very important to help children who are sensory seeking or auditory seeking, where it's getting in the way, there's a response cost. It's getting in the way of their ability to learn, their ability to interact with other children, their ability to interact with the environment, when it's really it's a disability. It's disabling them from interacting effectively with their environment, with their own bodies, and with other people, and from learning from the environment around them. That's when we help them and we let them know, like right now, we're reading and they're going to say, book. Right now, we are going to answer questions and we're going to use our mouths to, I'm going to say, talk. But helping them out to let them know that this is the time where we're reading a book. And this is the time when we're playing with vehicles, where we're making vehicle sounds. The same thing I've had with children who make water sounds. They're making this fish sound, whoop, 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 like a bubble fish sound. And it's so engrossing that they can't hear what's going around with them. They're not interacting with their environment. They're not interacting with others. They're just focusing, like it's almost like their eyes are crossed on making the perfect bubble sound, like whoop, 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 whoop. And the same thing with that. I say, we make the fish sound when we're playing with and they'll say water. And I like, so right now we are eating let's say snack. So it's just, there's times, and the reason I'm going to make this point is that there's always a response cost. And if you're engaging in a restrictive, repetitive behavior that is so overstimulating that you lose control of your own bodies, you lose control of your ability to interact with your environment, you lose control to interact with others, you lose control to pay attention to outside stimuli, that can be very isolating. When that happens, we need to help children to clue them in right now in this classroom routine. This is what we're doing. We're eating snack right now. You know, what do we do when we eat snack? We eat. What do? We have to talk. We talk right now. When we're in the water, what do? We make fish sounds. We'll make the best fish sounds in the world when we're doing water play. Right now, it's snack time. For instance, you might know someone that washes their hands. Washing your hands is a great thing. It's a great thing to wash your hands before you eat, but it's not a great thing to wash your hands if you're not at work because you're washing your hands, or if you're not on a date because you're washing your hands. Because it's become a restrictive, repetitive behavior in which you're missing out on other experiences because you're washing your hands 300 times a day. I believe that there is this balance in which we look at, here we're talking about echolalia, which is a wonderful thing, which is a wonderful way in which I teach you in my SIS membership and all of my materials, capitalize on echolalia. This is how we're going to teach these children to talk. This is how we're going to teach these children to have conversations. We're going to capitalize on echolalia. That's the bridge. That's the bridge to spontaneous communication. We're not going to blow that up. But on the other hand, I want to make very clear there's sensory issues that not just children with autism, that many children have. And these sensory issues in, for instance, auditory seeking behaviors in which children are making behaviors that block out the environment, that block out other people, that block out their ability to control their own bodies. These are times when these children really need help. And it's in the form of gentle redirection in which you're helping them out and you're putting them in that higher level thinking brain, and you're saying, okay, right now what we're doing is we're reading a book, and they finish your sentence, they say the word book, and saying that word puts them in this higher level thinking brain, but they have to have an idea what the word is, they have to form the word, they're doing motor planning, motor programming, this higher level thinking, and they're back in that brain. And that's where we need to be kind of all in. If we're going to learn, we can't be checked out. There's times where we make our water sounds, there's times where we make our vehicle sounds, that's a great thing, and there's times when we don't. So I hope that is helpful to you, and I'm just going to give you my 2 cents as someone who's been doing this for over 20 years and working with many children, not children with autism, but many children who are neurotypical, who have sensory issues, who are sensory seeking in the auditory realm, who are making sounds. A lot of times these kids need some help, and they need some help to check in to what we're doing, and because the sounds can be so stimulating for them that it can actually preclude them from interacting in the world. All right, well, I want you to take all of this information and do what you do best, which is make the world a better place, one child at a time. You will always be first. I hope to see you in the SIS membership. So roll up your sleeves, take action with me, make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be first.